Mira first noticed the way the town breathed when the baker switched the sign to closed and the last bicycle bell sighed down the lane. The leaves had turned exactly the color of toasted sugar, and somewhere a kettle ticked toward boiling, tiny sounds that stitched the dusk together. She wrapped her scarf twice, the wool smelling faintly of cedar, and stepped onto the cobblestone where the street lamps hummed like small bees. There was no hurry to anything. Footsteps softened as if the ground remembered every shoe that had crossed it and knew to cradle them. The storefront windows made honey squares on the street. A few moths tipped and drifted through the lamp halos, their wings slow as falling napkins. Mira's breath rose in a quiet cloud, then faded, as though the night was careful not to startle her with its own warmth. She turned toward the bookshop out of habit. It was the kind of door you had to lean your shoulder into. The bell above it rang with the particular tiredness that old bells acquire from telling the truth about arrivals and departures. The bookshop smelled of paper and cinnamon dust from the bakery next door. Mr. Leclerc, who had once been a schoolteacher and still had a voice that made whispers feel like lessons, glanced up and smiled without showing teeth. "Evening," he said, as if it were a lullaby. "The autumn stories have come in." Mira ran her fingertips along the spines. Auburn, umber, the dark green of pond water. She didn't read the titles. Tonight she wanted the shape of a book more than its words, the weight of calm in her hands. The shop's cat, Pip, hopped down from a stack of atlases and head-butted her knee, then turned 3 slow circles and fell asleep in a patch of lamp warmth, paws flicking at something in cat dreams. On the counter lay a small envelope tied with twine. Her name, Mira, was written in a tidy script that stood as straight as fence posts. She frowned. Mr. Leclerc was watching the door, not her, in that deliberate way adults do when they don't want to interrupt a secret. "For you," he said softly. "It arrived with the morning bread. Strange courier, that." She slid a thumb under the flap. Inside was a single card, blank except for a line etched in a warm, sepia ink. "Walk to the maple grove and listen." There was no stamp, no sender, no map. She looked up. Mr. Leclerc had gone back to polishing his spectacles, a task he completed every evening without the lenses ever needing it. "Do you know," she began. He shook his head once. "I know autumn when it clears its throat." That should have been puzzling, but nothing tonight had sharp edges. Mira tucked the note into her coat and borrowed a book with a cover the color of tea. She left a coin in the dish and stepped into the street, where the lamps were a little brighter than before, like kindly eyes. On her way to the grove, she passed the café. The window was fogged from breath and kettle steam. The chalkboard read Harvest Blend in a looping hand. Someone had set a candle in a little glass jar on each table, and their flames made the night look like it was wearing jewelry. Inside, a lone musician tuned a guitar in slow, low notes, careful not to wake any dreams too early. Mira tipped her head at him, and he nodded back, a tiny bow that said, "Yes, we're keeping the quiet intact." The town thinned. Houses shouldered closer like friends in a photograph, then spread out again as Mira followed the path past the old mill and the slow creek. There, the air changed. Not colder, just older, like a room that remembered who had danced in it. The maples stood taller than she remembered, their leaves a chorus of copper coins. And the wind made its first real remark of the evening, a sound less like a language and more like a feeling. "Listen," the note had said. She closed her eyes and let her breath fall into the same pace as the leaves. For a while there was only the rustle, which was the closest the world gets to a hush that still moves. Then, softly, so gently she could have mistaken it for her own thought, She heard it, a second music braided inside the first. Not a melody, exactly. More like a pattern. The leaves agreed to lift and set, and in the small space between those agreements a thread of sound slipped through, as delicate as a needle's whisper. You were right on time. Mira felt a smile that started behind her eyes and worked forward. Right on time for what? She asked the grove, feeling foolish and tender at once. A leaf loosened and fell, turning lazily, landing on her shoulder as if to be quite clear that it had chosen her. She brushed it into her palm and saw that the veins lined up in such a way that she could almost read them. Not letters, not numbers, just a sense, like when you wake and the dream is still sitting on your bed, looking at you without blinking. Go to the water, the sense said. Bring something warm. The creek widened into the pond behind the old schoolhouse. She had come here as a child to watch the ducks figure out their leadership structure, which changed hourly and depended on bread. Now the water lay flat as a button, dark with sky. Someone had strung tiny lights along the rail of the small wooden dock, and a thermos waited on the bench, breathing the quiet steam of peppermint. She poured herself a cup because the night had set itself up so kindly it would have been rude not to. The tea tasted like leaves that had grown up naming the sunshine. She dipped her toe in the pond and drew it back with a little gasp. Not cold, but as if the water knew secrets and preferred to share them slowly. The envelope note warmed in her pocket. She took it out, and although she had not put anything else inside, there was now a second card. Stay until the first owl. She looked around, saw no one, and noticed she wasn't the least bit frightened. It was hard to be afraid when even the bugs were polite, keeping their chirp to a conversational volume. She waited. Waiting is a kind of listening with the body, and it feels different at ponds. The dock ticked as it settled. Something small skittered under the bench, realized Mira was not a threat, and made peace with her shoe. The sky unrolled a bit more night from its pocket, and far away a train offered a yawn of iron. Then the owl, a single, rounded note that curved down the lane of the trees and came to sit near her like an old aunt. Mira laughed once, softly. She didn't clap, as if the sound might be shy, but she felt a pleasant tide move through the evening, as though a page had been turned without her touching it. The dock lights dimmed. A third card slid out of the envelope without any theater. Tomorrow, bring a book you do not need to read. The handwriting had not changed. Mira wondered whether anyone else in town had received such an errand. She thought of Mr. Leclerc polishing what was already clear, of the guitar player tuning strings to the pitch of a candle's flame. She imagined the baker tying up loaves with twine, sliding a note into the knotted bow for someone who thought they were only buying bread. Mira finished her tea. The cup warmed her hands to the wrists, then faded to a nice, idle heat. She stood, the boards of the dock sighing as if relieved to have carried her properly, and made her way back through the maple grove. The leaves cheered her out the door the way they did for the wind. At home, Mira lit one lamp. The attic roof slanted toward a square of sky, and the quilt on the bed held the day's collected heat the way a stone holds sun. She set the envelope on the nightstand, where it looked smaller than before, like a well-behaved pet. Before she slept, she placed the leaf she had caught inside a book to press it flat. The book's title was a sleepy phrase, "On the way to somewhere soft," and that seemed appropriate. In the last seconds before sleep, Mira heard the town make a sound she'd never noticed in all her seasons here. Not the clock, not the cat, not the kettle or the train. It was the sound a place makes when it believes you belong to it, the quiet, contented exhale of roofs and roads and river stones. Good night. Her breath answered without interruption, and the dark folded itself around her like the perfect blanket. Outside, the lamp moths practiced their slow dancing, the pond kept its counsel, and an owl turned the next page in the story with one calm blink. By morning, the leaf Mira had pressed was flatter than a thought that had made up its mind. It kept the color of late caramel and the shape of a hand learning how to wave. When the kettle breathed out, she poured hot water over a little nest of tea and watched the steam turn the kitchen window to milk. Somewhere in the fogged glass a fingertip traced a small curve that looked like a smile, then vanished, as if the window had tried out friendliness, liked it, and decided to save the rest for evening. The second card from the envelope waited on the table. Tomorrow, bring a book you do not need to read. Mira fingered the shelves. There were books she loved like friends and books she kept like furniture and one or two that had attached themselves to her life the way burrs cling to wool. She chose a sturdy little paperback with a frayed spine, a copy of gentle essays she had read 3 times and could now recite in the tone of rain. She tucked it into her bag along with a scarf that remembered October. The day moved the way autumn days do, kindly and without hurrying. Bread cooled on rails at the bakery. The postman leaned his bicycle against the blue door of the tailor and talked to a pigeon in a way that suggested both of them were winning the conversation. Somewhere, a child practiced the recorder with the courage of innocence, and the notes walked up a little hill and down again and decided they would try the trip once more. By dusk, the town folded itself back into its evening sweater. Mira stepped into boots that knew her ankles and tied them with a bow that looked better in lamplight. Outside, the air had the easy sweetness of roasting apples, and a breeze walked with her as if it had been waiting all day for company. When she reached the bookshop, the door was propped open with a stack of dictionaries that had agreed to be useful even when silent. Strings of small paper lanterns hung from the ceiling beams, each one cut from old book pages and stitched with twine. Their glow was the color of a remembered nap. Mr. Leclerc stood behind the counter tying a ribbon around nothing in particular, as though practicing tenderness. "Ah," he murmured, and the bell gave its polite cough. "You brought a book you can spare." Mira held it up, suddenly shy, as if she were giving away a secret. "Excellent." He pointed gently toward a table near the back. The plank was as smooth as the idea of a river and scattered with maple leaves that hadn't the heart to stay outside. A chalkboard sign said "Listening Night" in small letters, with a line beneath it, "Where pages rest and stories breathe." Pip, the cat, lay on the sign's base, tail making the slow metronome of a dream. "How does it work?" Mira asked, voice low to keep from waking the candles. "Just as the wind instructs." Mr. Leclerc adjusted his spectacles as if the answer might be printed on the air. "We do not read tonight. We let the books remember themselves. We hold them open and keep them company. It does them good to be listened to without the pressure of being understood." It sounded like kindness to people, too. Mira went to the table, placed her book in the company of others, a cookbook with butter stains shaped like continents, a novel with a train on its cover, a small, green volume that had been loved so often the title had become shy. A handful of townsfolk gathered. The guitar player from the café leaned his instrument against a chair and cupped a mug in both hands, taking a breath as if the steam might teach him a better way to exhale. Someone dimmed the shop lamps until the paper lanterns did most of the work. Their light made soft coins on the floorboards. Mr. Leclerc walked slowly, distributing thin strips of paper and small pencils as if they were remedies. "For notes you don't need to keep," he said when he reached Mira. "It can be a single word, or the way your shoulders feel when a sentence sighs. They sat, not all at once, the way water settles, bit by bit. Mira opened her book to a page that had always felt like late afternoon, spread her palms on either side, and listened. At first there was the shush of pages considering themselves, a restless whisper like a meadow unsure of which way to lean. Then the shop found its rhythm. A cough was a new chapter. A creak from the ladder was a comma. The radiator purred in a minor key. Somewhere a kettle clicked off, not wanting to intrude. Mira's pencil hovered over the paper. It didn't seem necessary to write anything, the silence had weight enough. But then a thought floated up like a leaf that had been waiting on the water's surface for someone to notice it. She wrote, "The words are lying down, and the air is tucking them in." She immediately felt silly and immediately felt relieved, because the paper accepted the sentence without judgment and the pencil enjoyed the curve of the letters. Across from her, an elderly woman with hair the color of a snowdrift in lamplight held open a cookbook at Soups for the Shivery Months. She smiled to herself in the very particular way of someone who has just remembered a certain ladle. The guitar player watched his own hands as if they were small birds perched in his lap. Pip rolled from his side to his back, paws softened into commas. After a while, 10 minutes or an hour, the shop made time into something friendly. Mr. Leclerc cleared his throat so gently the dust motes applauded. "If anyone has a note they wish to surrender," he said, "the glass bowl is ready." On the counter sat a clear bowl with a rim that caught the lantern light and divided it into quiet stars. One by one, people stood and drifted over, their notes folded into small shapes that didn't pretend to be origami. Mira added hers. The bowl made a sound like a teacup agreeing with a saucer when her paper touched the others. "Shall I?" Mr. Leclerc asked. There was a collective nod. The kind of nod that can only be achieved when no one feels rushed. He drew a strip and read. There was a page that smelled like the inside of a coat from a long journey. He smiled at the air. Another strip. I heard the punctuation tapping softly, asking to be let out into the night for a walk. A small girl with a gap in her teeth laughed, then covered her mouth because she had not meant to be loud. The room softened itself around her until the laughter became part of the story. Mr. Leclerc pulled another. My book reminded me of a promise I do not have to keep anymore. The lantern seemed to nod. Mira felt her chest loosen, as if she had been bracing for a change in weather that had decided to be kind instead. She didn't notice the envelope until the cat did. Pip sat up abruptly, as if a dream had called his name, and pointed one paw toward the door with great seriousness. An autumn draft brought in a crisp scent, something between apples and a new pencil, and the door, though no one had touched it, opened just enough to admit something small and deliberate. A white envelope slid across the floor with the confidence of a paper boat in the right stream and came to rest against Mira's shoe. No one pretended not to see it. But no one spoke either, the way a group will agree without rehearsal to trust a moment. Mira lifted the envelope. It was the same tidy hand, the same sepia ink, her name again. Inside, a card. Leave your book. Take 3 lantern breaths. Then follow the wind to the window where the train passes. Mira looked up. Mr. Leclerc adjusted his glasses, and his mouth made the shape of a smile that might also be a benediction. "The window," he murmured, "has been waiting for you." She set the book back on the table, palm resting on it for a respectful heartbeat, and took 3 lantern breaths as instructed. In on the glow, out on the dim. In on the next glow, out on the next dim. In, out. Her shoulders released a small, grateful secret she hadn't known they were keeping. The shop had a narrow side window that faced the disused spur of track behind the old school. That was where the evening trains passed with their soft iron lullaby, heading toward towns that pronounced night differently. At that window now, the glass held a thin film of fog from the room's contentment. As Mira approached, the condensation gathered itself into a shape like handwriting. Letter by letter, without hurry, words appeared as if the glass were remembering a note from long ago. When the carriage of moonlight arrives, let it pass through you. She touched the pane with 2 fingers, cold, kind, and the fog thinned enough for her to see her own face, made stranger and more beautiful by the lantern light. Behind her, the room breathed. The train was not due, not yet, but the tracks had begun their quiet humming, the way a throat clears before a song. "Stand here," said a voice behind her. Not a voice to startle. A grandmother of a voice, familiar without identifying itself. Mira did as she was told, positioning herself so her reflection was both present and slightly undone. She closed her eyes. The humming rose, became a purr, then a breeze, then a ribbon of motion she could have mistaken for a thought. The train did not appear. There was no glare of headlight, no clatter. But the sensation of passing moved through the room like a kindly river, and the lanterns swayed on their strings as if bowing to a dignitary. It passed through Mira, the way the window had requested. Not like a wind through an empty hall, but like music through someone who has decided to dance while staying perfectly still. She felt a brief coolness, then a brightness that did not require eyes. And in that brightness a picture formed itself. The pond at night, a small boat tidied to the dock rail with a sensible knot, and on the seat a folded blanket that had decided to smell like cedar and patience. The picture faded. Mira opened her eyes. In the fog on the glass, the message had changed. Moon on the water. Bring the bowl of notes to the shore. She turned. Mr. Leclerc already held the glass bowl in 2 careful hands. It looked like he was carrying a bright fish. "If this is for you," he said gently, "then tonight is for all of us." They closed the shop in the manner of people who believe doors appreciate a dignified good night. Candles were snuffed with a bell-shaped cap that made a soft kiss sound. Books were left open in their nests to finish their resting. Pip circled twice upon the high stool and went to sleep as if he had invented it. Mr. Leclerc lifted his coat from the peg, and the guitar player slung his instrument over one shoulder like a moon he planned to borrow and return. Outside, the street had the particular shine that comes to cobblestones after many evenings. A modest gleam, a little puddle of star here and there. The whisper of leaves moving with conversation's courtesy. A handful of neighbors joined the small procession toward the pond, each of them carrying something that might be needed. An extra scarf, a thermos, a memory. The bowl of notes glowed faintly, catching lantern light and the kind of light that appears wherever people walk with gentle purpose. They took the path past the mill. The creek rehearsed the story it would tell if called upon, practicing its vowels against stones. The owl from last night offered one soft syllable. When they reached the grove, the leaves did what leaves do best. They made a sound like ideas agreeing and hung there like coins on a string waiting to be spent on wishes. By the pond, the picture Mira had seen through the window proved true, as pictures often do, despite our surprise. A boat, a simple rowboat with oars that had made peace with their calluses, bobbed at the dock. On its seat lay a blanket exactly as promised, cedar and patience included. Along the rail, the same tiny lights from last night had arranged themselves, though no one mentioned having carried them. The moon had climbed to a height from which it could be generous, and its reflection lay on the water like a road no one had to take unless they wished. "Shall I?" asked the guitar player, and he played the softest pattern of notes Mira had ever heard, more posture than melody, something to hold in your hands while you spoke quietly to the night. The townsfolk found places along the dock and the bank, the way people find places at a good story. Mira stepped into the boat. It gave a friendly sigh. Mr. Leclerc handed her the bowl, and as she took it, the notes inside made the faintest rustle, like a handful of moths deciding the route home. She set the bowl on her knees, spread the blanket over it to keep the papers warm, and looked up. "What now?" she asked, not alarmed to find herself asking the moon. The envelope in her coat, she had brought it out of habit, warmed near her heart and grew a little heavier, like a bird deciding to be real. She drew it out. Another card had appeared, as inevitable as dew. "Row to where the moon sits. Do not chase. Let the water bring you. When you feel the boat stop, take one note and read it to the night." Rowing in sleepless water is a lesson in trust. Mira let the oars rest in the water the way fingers rest on piano keys before music, and with the smallest pull she invited the boat to move. It did. The pond accepted her with the composure of a host who knows their place is at its best. The light on the water was not a solid thing. It was 1,000 glimmers agreeing to behave as one. She didn't aim for the brightest spot, exactly. She made a slow circle near it, as if conducting a dance in which she knew only the first step and the last was forgiveness. The boat stopped, not abruptly, more like a question settling into an answer. Mira felt a mild hum in the wood beneath her shoes, the pleasant ache of a day that had done a good job. She lifted the blanket, reached into the bowl, and pinched one folded note between finger and thumb. It opened with the sound of a small intention becoming a letter. She read, "Today I forgave a chair for creaking when I sat down. It has held me up for years. It may creak as it pleases." The night listened. A breeze spread the words over the water like butter over warm toast. On the bank, someone made a little sound that meant yes. Mira chose another. "My mother's recipe for broth says, wait until the pot is also ready." I did not know pots needed their own time. I will try to knead mine. The guitar answered with 2 notes that could have been a nod. The moon became a little wider in the water, or perhaps Mira's breathing did. Another slip. I remembered the name of a girl from school today. I had not thought of her since we were small. Saying her name felt like returning a library book and finding a ribbon in it. They were not confessions. They were not proclamations. They were the ordinary treasures that only reveal themselves when the night is unafraid of quiet. Mira read until the bowl lightened in her lap and the edges of the boat felt familiar. From time to time she glanced at the trees, which were patient in the handsome way of trees that have learned most lessons. When the last note had been shared with the air, the pond made a sound like a page turning at a bedside. The boat drifted, unafraid of doing nothing. Mira wrapped the blanket around the now empty bowl as if it were a friend who had told the truth and might now be tired. The moon lowered itself by a fraction, a courteous bow. A small ripple touched the hull, and with it another card slid out of the envelope. The handwriting was steady as ever, but the ink had gathered a little silver from the night. "Tomorrow. Moon on the water. Bring the book that pressed the leaf. Come alone, but know you won't be lonely." Mira looked toward the dock. Faces in lantern light are kinder. The lines make more sense in that glow. Mr. Leclerc stood with his hands in his coat pockets, looking exactly like a memory you could step into. The guitar player's head tilted to catch the last harmony before it faded. Someone passed cups along the line, Steam moved from person to person like a small, traveling sun. She rowed back without needing to aim. The boat had understood her now, and the oars enjoyed helping. When she stepped onto the dock, the wood pressed the shape of her soles just long enough to greet them. The bowl went back to Mr. Leclerc, and he cradled it as if it were still full. "Well done," he said, "the way you say it to a day that has minded its manners." "What is this for?" Mira asked, meaning everything and nothing, the envelopes and the lanterns, the unreading, the window's fog and the boat's gentle certainty. "For sleep," he said, as if the answer had been available all along. "For carrying the town into its dreaming without dropping any of the small, kind thoughts. We are clumsy with kindness in the daylight. At night we can practice." They walked back together, the group thinning the way laughter does when it becomes satisfied with itself. At the bookshop, the door welcomed them with a familiar hinge. The lanterns, sensing the hour, had begun to dim into a memory of light. Books, left open, appeared to have fallen asleep mid-sentence, which is an honest way to rest. Mira reclaimed her book, the one she did not need to read, and tucked inside it the card with tomorrow's instruction and the leaf she had pressed. The leaf's veins had deepened into a map of calm. She slipped the volume under her arm. It felt slightly warmer than paper ought to be. "Until tomorrow," Mr. Leclerc said, which is what you say when you don't fully know what will happen next but you trust it all the same. On the way home, the town wore its midnight face. Windows as eyelids, the bakery dreaming of ovens that open like mouths making "oh." Somewhere, the train finally passed, a soft iron lullaby, and the rails sang in a tone made only for those who had listened earlier. Mira paused on the bridge over the creek. The water held the moon like an old story retold by someone who now understands why they have always loved it. At home, the attic welcomed her with the kindly angle of its roof. She laid the book on the nightstand and set the envelope beside it, the two of them like old travel companions telling each other about different roads. She poured a small cup of warm milk, sprinkled a forgiveness of cinnamon over it, and watched the swirl become a galaxy and then a quiet sky. When she slid under the quilt, the bed made faithful sounds. The room held the day's remnants, the moth-soft perfume of paper, a faint whisper of pond, the remembered bow of lanterns. Her last thought before sleep was not a thought but a simple feeling, that somewhere in the town, words were resting, and because they were resting, so could she. Outside, the maple grove practiced tomorrow's wind. The pond arranged its face to be ready for a second moon. In the bookshop, Pip turned once, a paragraph becoming a period, and dreamed of a bowl of notes that described the exact sound a cat makes when the world is perfect and drowsy. The envelope, patient as ever, kept its counsel, but if one had listened closely, one might have heard the faintest rustle from within, the promise of Part 3 written in ink that shimmered like quiet water. Morning unspooled itself with the care of someone setting a table for a friend. Mira woke to the soft tick of the attic clock and the warmer, deeper quiet that comes after a good sleep. The book she had used to press the leaf waited on the nightstand. When she opened it, the leaf lay smooth as a kindly thought, its veins a quiet map. The page beneath wore a pale, ghostly silhouette where the leaf had rested, like a held hand's warmth lingering on a sleeve. The house made small, approving sounds as she moved through it. Floorboards hummed the note of content wood. The kettle breathed a cloud against the window that twice this week had practiced smiling. On the table, the envelope behaved as if it had always belonged to kitchens and tea and patient mornings. Inside, the card from last night, steady in its sepia hand. Tonight, moon on the water. Bring the book that pressed the leaf. Come alone, but know you won't be lonely. She set the card beside her cup and buttered a heel of bread, finding joy in the way butter decided who it wanted to be. The day carried her gently through its chores. She rinsed blue mugs, straightened a row of pine cones on the sill, wrote a short note to herself that said only, "Remember to breathe in the way the trees do." Outside, the town wore its afternoon quietly. Bicycles murmured past, their chains a soft string of coins. A dog rearranged a patch of sun to fit its head. The tailor pinned a hem as if fastening the hour to the day. As dusk drew its shawl across the roofs, Mira wrapped her scarf twice and slipped the book into her bag. She paused at the bookshop window as she passed. The paper lanterns slept, their light reduced to a memory of glow. Inside, Mr. Leclerc looked up from a careful arrangement of nothing in particular and lifted his hand in greeting, a motion so gentle it created no ripple in the evening. He did not call out. The town understood the word alone when it was asked to. At the edge of the grove, leaves rehearsed an older language to comfort the younger ones. Mira felt the friendly hush that belongs to places that have been kind for a long time. Between the trunks, the path gave way, the pond appearing slowly, as if the night were introducing two old friends who had almost forgotten one another's exact faces. The water received the moon like an honored guest. Not a mirror, not really. More a table laid in silver where reflections came to eat quietly. Along the dock rail, tiny lights had found their posts again, courteous as ushers. The rowboat waited, blunt-nosed and sensible, the sort of boat that knows the value of arriving exactly where one can tie a good knot. Mira stood a moment before stepping down. The book felt warmer in her hands than paper ought to feel. When she opened the cover, a thin slip of new card revealed itself. She had not felt it there before. The same neat handwriting, the ink a shade paler, as if borrowed from the moon. Open to the leaf's shadow. Hold the page to the light. Read with your eyes closed. She smiled at that last instruction. It made sense in the way autumn always makes sense once you accept that leaves understand landing better than you do. She found the page where the leaf had pressed its shy imprint, lifted the book toward the moon, and, obedient to the card, closed her eyes. At first there was only the sound of water arranging itself, and the night doing arithmetic with crickets. Then, quietly, a brightness behind her eyelids, as though someone had opened a door inside a house inside her. The page warmed her fingers. She did not read words. She listened to their temperature. Little glows rose from the paper, a snowfall reversed, and drifted into the air as specks of pale silver. They gathered above the book, threaded themselves into soft shapes, and became pictures so faint they might have been feelings. A radiator in January, purring like a well-fed cat. A forehead kissed by a hand that smelled of flower. The hush of a library stairwell. A coat hung to dry next to another coat, both of them pleased. A train window, rain making tiny roads on glass. None of the pictures startled her. They did what good memories do in autumn. They knocked politely, were invited in, and sat down to rest beside the present moment without claiming it. She stood like that for a long while, the book held up, eyes closed, watching what cannot be seen except by the body. When at last she lowered her arms, the glow flecks kept a little orbit around her head and then yawned themselves into the night. A ripple replied from the pond, not at the edge, not in the center, but somewhere between, a discreet acknowledgement. Mira stepped into the boat. The wood took her weight with a friend's reliability. She set the book on the seat and the leaf on her palm. It looked as if it wanted to be near water. She obliged, placing it carefully on the surface. Instead of sinking, it rested between worlds, drawn forward by a path only it could sense. The boat moved as though it had been asked in its own language. The envelope warmed in her pocket. Another card arrived with the gentle inevitability of dew finding grass. Row as if you were greeting someone you already love. Stop when the water stops you. Then ask your question out loud. The oars dipped in, 2 long spoons stirring a story. Mira did not aim. She let the boat choose, guided by the small leaf setting a pace just ahead. The moon stitched a silver seam down the pond. Behind her, the dock lights became a tender constellation, patient and near. The water, at last, offered stillness so complete it felt like a held breath. Mira rested the oars. The boat obeyed. The leaf turned once, twice, and waited. "What should I ask?" she whispered, not to the moon, not to the boat exactly, but to the agreement among them. The reply was not a voice. It was the easiest thought she had all day, so easy she might have missed it by looking for a harder one. Ask what you do not need to carry to bed. She tried a few questions in her head and felt them fall away, too large, too clever. When the right one found her, it felt like a button sliding home. What can the night hold for me, so I don't have to? The pond answered by refusing to hurry. A thin thread of mist stitched itself from bank to bank. The moon widened on the water, which is how moons say yes. Then, on the page where the leaf had lain, words appeared, not printed, not inked, but the way frost writes. Pale, exact, temporary. Your lists. The corners of conversations you kept turning over. The measuring you did when no one asked you to measure anything. The echo of a name you do not need tonight. The tightness in your shoulders that believed it was useful. The news you listened to after your heart had already given the day a good grade. As she read, each item felt itself recognized and, having been seen, took a small bow and slipped off stage. She felt her chest loosen by increments. Her jaw remembered how to be unimportant. The leaf drifted closer, bumping the hull with the faintest hello. "Thank you," Mira said, and the pond accepted thanks in the way bodies of water do, by not making a spectacle of it. Another card slid from the envelope, this time soft as a sigh. Give the water a line for safekeeping. Use the blank at the back of the book. Fold the page when you're done. The end paper, unprinted, the color of quiet, waited. Mira balanced the book on her knee and wrote in the slanted light. I arrived with nothing to prove. I will leave with nothing to hold against myself. She folded the page once, twice, not tearing, only creasing, as if tucking in a child. When she looked up, she discovered she was not precisely alone after all. A shape at the edge of the pond, a figure sketched in moonlight more than drawn, lifted a hand. Not a ghost, not that, a version of herself as the town saw her. Someone who made slow evenings an open listening part of the furniture. The figure's face was gentle and entirely unremarkable, which is to say kind. Mira didn't speak. The figure didn't either. They regarded each other across a short, merciful distance. Then, as the crickets changed key, the other Mira lifted her chin toward the book, as if to say, keep that line, and smoothed the air with her palm. A blessing for water. A breeze shook the grove just enough to move 1 branch's worth of leaves. The owl made a sound like a page being turned by someone who loves the book. Mira felt the oddest sensation, that the boat, the pond, the moon, and she were all part of one careful breath. On the inhale, everything grew a shade wider. On the exhale, everything rested more deeply in itself. She touched the water with 2 fingers. Cool accepted warm without argument. She thought of the bowl of notes from last night, how each small truth had made space for the next. Here, on the water, the same rule pertained. The night did not hoard what it held, it cradled and released. "Is there something I should leave with you?" she asked, surprised at how easy it was to imagine the pond nodding. The leaf, as if volunteering, lifted slightly, guided by some unlikely current, and came to rest against her fingertips. She placed it back between the book's pages, felt the press of its calm. Then, from her coat pocket, she drew a tiny, unimportant worry that had made itself heavier by trying. A shopping receipt folded and refolded, nothing owed, nothing due. She smoothed it and laid it on the water. It darkened, surrendered its starch, and became part of the pond's alphabet. A new card. She knew it had arrived because the envelope grew lighter. Row a small circle, just big enough to remind the water who you are. Then rest, and let yourself drowse. If you dream, dream standing still. The circle her oars drew was not perfect. The boat forgave this immediately. The motion stitched her to the night the way a hem binds fabric to a body. When she stopped, the boat drifted but did not wander. Mira folded the blanket, cedar, patience, and tucked it around her waist like a lap of warm twilight. She closed her eyes, not to sleep but to rest within sleep's foyer. She did dream, or something like it. Not of faces or places. She became, for a while, a lamp on a small table in a window. People passed outside and softened as they did, the way we all do when lit correctly. She listened to the sound of feet making up their minds. She understood, in a way that required no words, the worth of shining without agenda. When the dream let her go, it did not disappear. It found a shelf in her ribcage and sat down there, available later. When she lifted her eyes again, the moon had climbed a careful step. The grove held its breath the way choirs do before the note they love most. Somewhere behind her, a train whispered itself past, the rails singing a tone that made the water's skin tremble pleasantly. The final card of the night slid into her palm, cool and neat. Tomorrow, the last leaf's lullaby. Return to the grove at the hour when cups make the room smell like cinnamon. Bring no book, bring your listening. Mira tucked the card into the book, let the oars take hold, and returned to shore in 3 unhurried breaths. The dock accepted her as if she were back from a long, successful kindness. She placed the blanket where she had found it. She turned once to look at the pond, which had resumed its practiced indifference to drama, and saw, just for a second, the pale outline of someone stepping out of moonlight back into the dark trees, trailing no story at all. The walk home was the sort of quiet that makes paths remember how they got their names. Her boots met the bridge in the exact rhythm of content travel. At the bookshop, all was still. Lanterns down to their last polite embers, Pip's silhouette a comma curled into sleep. She did not knock. Alone meant bringing the glow back with you and placing it where others could find it without having to ask. In her attic room, she opened the book to the folded end paper and read her line aloud, once, the way you might say amen to yourself. The air seemed to admire the sentence for having the courage to be simple. She slid the leaf into a fresh page, no pressing this time, only keeping company, and set the book to rest. She made warm milk with cinnamon because the night had mentioned it indirectly, and the night is wise in these matters. She listened while it warmed, the smallest, soothing noises, and turned off the lamp just before the moon tucked itself behind a soft blur of cloud. In darkness, the house grew kinder still, divesting itself of corners. Her bed became a boat. The quilt, a small geography that had chosen peace. She thought, but only as far as the first small thought. that the town had grown a ritual in which no one was required to be impressive, and that this was the most impressive thing of all. Sleep came the way a good friend arrives, without knocking, bringing nothing but presents, staying exactly as long as needed. Outside, the pond filed the evening away in its quiet cabinets. The grove rehearsed one last time, a whispering made of 1,000 copper coins. The owl closed both eyes and, for once, did not pretend to be a punctuation mark. On the windowsill, the envelope lay flat and patient, ready to become exactly what tomorrow would ask of it and nothing more. The day arrived as softly as a mitten placed over a cold hand. Mira woke to the brief, friendly tap of rain on the roof and the deeper hush that follows when clouds remember their manners. In the kitchen, cinnamon rose from her cup and drifted through the rooms as if it had been given a key. The hour had the exact weight the last card had promised, the time when cups make the air sweet and everyone starts speaking in smaller voices. She did not take a bag. She did not take a book. She folded only her scarf into itself and slipped the quiet into her pocket like a coin. The envelope lay where she had left it, plain as a cloud. When she lifted it, no new card slid out. The paper felt rested, its work nearly done. Outside, the town wore its best evening face. Roofs a shade darker than the sky, windows the color of toast, streets ready for soft footsteps. The tailor swept his doorway with the slow rhythm of someone who believes floors appreciate courtesy. The baker pressed a palm to the oven's side the way a person presses a palm to a friend's shoulder. "Thank you, enough for today." Pip the cat watched from the bookshop window, his face a calm comma, then vanished into the page of the shop as if turning it. At the edge of the grove, the air tasted like leaves and distant bread. The trees made a faint sound like blankets being shaken once before bed. People came in twos and ones. No announcement had been made. Word travels differently when it belongs to a season rather than a person. The guitar player arrived with his instrument in a coat. Mr. Leclerc came with empty hands and the look of someone prepared to carry something that couldn't be seen. Near the center of the grove stood a maple broader than a kitchen and older than any old story that had ever fallen asleep in town. Its branches were a chandelier of copper and honey. Almost all of the leaves had let go. Almost. One remained, small and obliging, shaped like the idea of a hand. It hung from a high twig, turning slightly, practicing goodbye. Mira felt the envelope warm against her palm. She held it without opening it, certain that if it had anything to say, it would say it in a way that did not interrupt the evening. The townsfolk found places on logs and stones and patches of grass that had once been summer. Children leaned against knees. A thermos traveled. The owl chose a branch that could see everything and pretended, not successfully, that it was only punctuation. Mr. Leclerc cleared his throat the way a librarian clears a path. "Tonight," he said, and even that was almost too much. He smiled and began again, smaller. "Tonight, we let the last leaf choose the moment. Our task is to make the kind of quiet that helps choosing feel easy." He nodded to the guitarist, who set his fingers to the strings and sent out a pattern that felt like a breath you forgot to be clever about. Not a melody to follow. A steadying. He nodded to the kettle someone had thought to bring. Cups made their rounds, the cinnamon in them acting as a lantern for the inside of each person. A child's mitten was returned to its partner. A scarf was untwisted and retied with less ambition. Somewhere at the far edge of the grove, the train exhaled. The rails sang a line too soft to memorize but easy to keep. The envelope in Mira's hand loosened, then grew the delicacy of something almost done. She touched the flap and lifted it. One last card lay inside, a warmer shade of sepia, as if steeped in tea. Stand where you can see the leaf and the faces. Count 3 lantern breaths. Remember something small that was kind. Then give it to the air. She stepped to a place where the maple's high twig and the curve of the crowd lived in the same gaze. She took the 3 breaths, in on an imagined glow, out on an imagined dim. The kindness came without work. A passerby straightening a bicycle that had fallen while no one looked. A door held twice as long as necessary. A hand setting down a second cup without asking if the first was empty. Mira didn't say it out loud. She let the memory rise and lift itself as steamed as from tea, visible and warm and then part of the larger weather. Other people were doing the same, though the grove kept their thoughts private. The air thickened with unremarkable tenderness. You could smell it, a blend of wool, leaf, cinnamon, and the clear scent that comes from water when it is thinking only about reflecting the sky. Mr. Leclerc returned to the bowl of notes from listening night, carried here like a friendly lamp. He set the glass at the base of the maple. "We'll not read tonight," he whispered. "Let the pages sleep. Let the papers watch." The last leaf twitched in a small breeze, then settled. It seemed to be looking as much as hanging. An old woman raised a finger, tentative but sure enough to be seen. "Maybe," she said, "we can hum the sound books make when you close them softly." The group smiled. The suggestion felt right. People tried a little hum in their throats, then adjusted themselves to the common key, the way neighbors adjust their steps on a sidewalk so they arrive at a corner together. The hum was simple. It asked nothing. It sounded like gratitude found after misplacing it briefly. The guitarist wove in, barely there, the strings aligned to the group's easy note. No one sang a tune. No words arrived. If the owl felt it had a role, it waited with admirable restraint. Leaves confide in wind. Wind confides in bark. Bark confides in rings no one sees. Mira thought of that communication ladder and felt herself on it, not high, not low, only placed. The envelope cooled in her hand like a pebble dipped once in a stream and lifted again. At the edge of the group, the postman, still carrying the day's last unimportant letter in his bag, cleared his throat and spoke as if asking permission from the air. "Sometimes," he said, "I tell the tree what the letter would say if it knew more about gentleness." He kept his eyes on his shoes, but his voice made its way up to the twig. The child with the gap-toothed smile from listening night whispered to the ground, as children do when they are casting spells that are also prayers. A pair of teenagers shared a scarf in a way that suggested both of them were in on a joke called "Winter will come, but not tonight." Mira looked at the leaf. It accepted their company without owning it. It did not strain. It did not decide while being watched. The hum rose a small step, then settled again. Breathing adjusts to comfort and we follow without knowing. In the bookshop, if anyone had passed its window, they would have seen lanterns asleep and a cat waking briefly to change punctuation. The first real breeze arrived, no flourish, just a careful hand moving a single curtain. The leaf turned half a degree, told the petiole something, and returned to its thinking. Mira's chest loosened. She realized she had been holding it as if animated decisions required her effort. Another breeze. The guitar found a note she recognized from the pond's skin. She felt the town line up along one invisible chord. Bakery, tailor, schoolhouse, bridge, mill, pond, bookshop. The alley where bicycles lean against each other and decide to be friends. Pip padded between ankles and sat with all the composure a cat has when it has chosen to be part of a ceremony without adopting the ceremony's anxieties. He stared up as if he had arranged the whole thing and was pleased with everyone's work. The last leaf let go of a little more of itself. It did not fall. It simply did not hold as tightly and found that this, too, was holding. Words arrived in Mira's head that weren't hers, and she didn't try to keep them. You may stop now. Everything you loved about the day knows how to lie down without your supervision. The final breeze came as if it had always been scheduled for this hour and only now remembered to arrive. No drama, just a small, adequate invitation. The leaf accepted. It lifted, it turned, it drifted. Not straight down. Leaves believe in the dignity of a curve. It spun once, then faced the ground as if greeting an old neighbor, then landed on the surface of the glass bowl and rested there like a lid made by luck. The hum thinned into silence. The guitar released its last held strain. Somewhere outside the grove, a door latched itself with a soft, satisfied click. The owl, bless its restraint, offered one single note that wore a bedtime hat. No one clapped. Of course no one clapped. People do not applaud sunsets or the end of a good sentence spoken in a kitchen. They simply give thanks by being quiet for a few more breaths. Mr. Leclerc lifted the bowl with the leaf afloat. He tipped his head toward Mira, an invitation, not an assignment. She stepped forward. The glass felt cool and important without being fragile. The leaf floated as if it knew it was exactly where it should be to become a story that did not need to be told to be true. Walk it to the water? The old woman asked. The question shaped politely as a suggestion, which is to say yes. They traveled as they had the night before, a procession of people who understood that walking can be part of language. Along the path, the creek practiced being a string section. The rails, with their ear for timing, kept the night in tempo. At the dock, the tiny lights came on without anyone's hand, which is often how kindness operates. Mira set the bowl on the bench and lifted the leaf with wet fingertips. It lay on her palm like a small, faithful memory. She set it on the pond, and the water said thank you by making no unnecessary sound. Rings traveled out, slow and mathematical, until they met the shore and forgot why they had left. The moon had not yet risen high. The sky was a folded blanket leaned against the horizon. Another card slid from the envelope, surely the last one. The paper now felt nearly as light as breath. She unfolded it. Well done. Leave us the bowl. Take only the quiet you need. Walk home without improving anything. She laughed, which startled a fish in the way a kindness can startle you when you thought you'd used your share for the week. She dried the bowl with the blanket and tucked both into the shadow under the bench where the dock keeps its inventory of patience. No one gave a speech. People developed the unanimous urge to look at the water and then at one another and then at their feet. Hands found pockets. Scarves were angled. Good nights were traded at a volume the dark could absorb easily. The guitarist ran his thumb along the strings once, a good night in wood. Mira and Mr. Leclerc lingered as others fell away like soft commas in a long sentence. It is always a relief, he said, to be reminded that the day does not require us to hold it up from beneath. She nodded, thinking of lists and small papers that learned how to float and then how to disappear. Will the envelopes keep coming? She asked. Not because she needed them but because she was fond of them now the way you become fond of a routine that has shown itself to be gentle. I suspect, he said, that when a town has learned the steps, the music can live in anyone's pocket. He tapped his jacket, smiled, and pulled out nothing at all. They walked back through the grove where absence had a texture that felt like rest. The big maple stood dignified, as trees do after doing something important. A small wind tidied the ground's new quilt and went on its way, pleased with its housekeeping. At the bookshop, the door allowed them a gracious hinge. Inside, the paper lanterns woke enough to be polite and then drowsed again. Pip leapt to the counter and presented his head for the two-scratch blessing. Mr. Leclerc returned to the ritual of polishing lenses that already saw clearly. It is good to let a habit finish its movements even when it is no longer necessary. Mira traced a fingertip along the spines nearest the door and murmured something that sounded like a thank you but had no word assigned to it. She did not take a book. Tonight, pages would keep each other company. She touched the bell, once, so small it only counted to itself, and stepped into the street. The town had the settled look of a place that has made its bed. A single window showed a figure lowering a shade, the fabric catching the lamp's glow and making it kinder on the way down. The bridge met her with unremarkable grace. The mill sent up one last sigh on behalf of wood. The tailor turned off his light and left a small note in the window that said tomorrow in letters that let the day choose its pace. At home, Mira set the envelope on the nightstand. It made no sound, which felt like a good sign. She warmed milk and let a pinch of cinnamon fall like a blessing. She did nothing while it warmed, which is sometimes the most important part. In the attic room, the quilt held the shape of rest before she even lay down. She climbed into bed with the exact amount of ceremony necessary for a good sleep, none and all. She placed her hands where they could learn from stillness. For a moment, with a fondness that was free of requirement, she thought of the pond, the leaf, the bowl. She thought of the bookshop's open pages resting, of the train's soft iron lullaby, of cups and scarves and songs that had decided not to use words. She thought of the last card's instruction and followed it fully. She did not improve the moment. She let it improve itself. Her breathing joined the town's, roofs, rails, water, cat, tree. One set of lungs made of many small, amiable parts. At the last instant before sleep, she felt a shift. Not an ending, a settling. The way flour settles in a jar after being carried, leaving room at the top for the next baking day. The envelope on the nightstand lightened and, very quietly, unmade itself into the air. If anyone had been there to see, which they were not, they would have watched it thin to the translucence of a memory that no longer needed paper. It left behind nothing but the feeling that instructions, like scaffolding, can be removed when a structure learns to stand without them. Outside, the big maple kept easy watch over its quilt of leaves. The pond turned its face toward morning with confidence. The owl put away punctuation for the night and practiced dreaming in long, unbroken sentences. Pip, in the dark bookshop, turned onto his other comma and rested there. And the town, now a little more practiced at being gentle, carried itself into sleep as if it had always known how.